Good morning, everybody. Thank you for being here today, taking a few moments. If you want to follow along, Genesis chapter 16, we'll be starting in verse number 3. As you do that, I'd appreciate it again very much if you would like, share, and or comment on the post. And then in verse 3, we will pick up with the story of Abram and Sarah. So, after Abram had lived 10 years in the land of Canaan, Sarah, Abram's wife, took Hagar the Egyptian, her servant, and gave her to Abram, her husband, as a wife. And he went into Hagar, and she conceived, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked with contempt on her mistress. And Sarah said to Abram, "May the wrong done to me be on you. I gave my servant to your embrace, and when she saw that she had conceived, she looked on me with contempt. May the Lord judge between you and me." Sarah does what I guess most of us do when we don't like the way God's moving. We do it ourselves. We decide God needs some help. We have a different plan, a better plan. And again, this was cut. This was not out of the ordinary in that time when the wife could not conceive that a servant would be taken and used to bring about a descendant. It wasn't. Again, this isn't maybe unusual for us today, but it was not out of the normal even for their time. However, it wasn't God's plan. This wasn't what God had told them to do, and they're both guilty here. Sarah comes up with the plan. Abram goes along with the plan. And he was the one who had received the word from God telling him how things were going to be. And he was the one who had received the promise. He was the man of the house. He was the leader. And so, it may have been her plan, but it was his place to say, no, that's not what we're going to do. And what we see in this story then is obviously the danger of impatience. And I think most of us today recognize the pretty much every time we are impatient, even when we're not talking necessarily about purely spiritual things, whether it's driving down the road, whether it's at work, whatever it is, impatience almost always gets us in trouble. If you're cooking and the recipe says cook it for 30 minutes at 300, but you don't want to wait 30 minutes, so you crank it up to 350 and think I'll cook it 20 minutes, and it messes up the recipe, messes up the food. Again, impatience on the road. You end up in a wreck. You end up getting a ticket from the policeman. No matter where we go, impatience almost never. I really can't think of too many times in my life where my impatience has ever worked out for my benefit. It made me feel better at the time to think, well, I'm getting things moving. I'm getting things on the ball here. But in the long run, I can't ever think of a time where impatience paid off. And in particular, when we're dealing with things in the spiritual world, when God has given us direction, when God is leading us, and we get impatient. Impatience always results in terrible consequences. Now, here's the funny thing about this. Sarah, what her plan was still to see what God had said done, to see descendants for Abraham. Still was in that way. She still wanted to see the descendants and bring about the promise of God. She had the right motive. She just had the wrong plan. And so, that we can think we're doing the right thing, can even look like the right thing. I mean, most of the time we can justify it. Yes, sir, officer, I was speeding, but I'm late for work. We can almost always come up with a justification for why we're doing what we're doing in our impatient actions. But here we see, I think, she had the right idea, she had the right plan, she had the right motive. She wanted to see what God had promised come to be. She just didn't want to wait for it. We're like the old sign that says, God grant me patience, but I want it right now. And so she, in her own, devised a method, came up with a plan, a worldly plan to fulfill a godly promise. We do that. I've seen preachers do that. We get in our mind, well, God wants me to. I've seen this a number of times in my ministry. A pastor get in his mind that God wants him to move from the church he's at, and he'll start going through all kinds of hoops and things to make that happen on his own. We try to get ahead of God, and instead of being patient and waiting on God, refusing to wait, refusing to listen, running out ahead of God, will always result in terrible consequences. Never fails. We will come up with the wrong method. We'll justify it and think, well, I'm just trying to do, this is for God, but impatience ends up causing us to fall back on the world's plans. Again, this was normal in the world to do what Sarah did, but it was not God's plan. Let's be cautious and careful. It's easy to do for all of us to get impatient and try to get ahead of God, try to help God. Let's learn to trust Him, follow Him, even when He's not going the speed we think He should go. Have a good one. We'll see you.